The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as I crouched beside the lifeless mother bobcat, my heart sinking with each passing second. 23 years as a wildlife biologist had prepared me for many things, but the sight of 3 tiny cubs huddled beneath their mother's still form never got easier. I'm Sarah Martinez, and at 45, I thought I'd seen it all. The mother had been struck by a vehicle on the remote desert highway, probably while hunting for food to feed her babies. As I gently moved her body, 3 pairs of bright blue eyes stared up at me from the rocky outcropping where they'd been hiding. The cubs couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. Their spotted coats were barely visible through the dust and debris, and their tiny, mewling cries pierced the desert silence. Without their mother, they had maybe hours before dehydration, and the harsh desert heat claimed them. My hands trembled as I reached for the first cub. Protocol demanded I contact the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, but the nearest facility was 4 hours away. These babies needed immediate care, and something deep in my chest told me this moment would change everything. The smallest cub, barely the size of my palm, nestled against my shirt as I lifted her. Her siblings followed reluctantly, their fear palpable, but their survival instinct stronger. As I placed them carefully in the carrier I always kept in my truck, I whispered a promise I didn't yet understand the weight of. I've got you now. You're safe. Looking back, those words mark the beginning of the most extraordinary chapter of my life. 3 orphaned souls were about to teach me lessons about love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living creatures. The drive back to my research station felt eternal. Every bump in the desert road sent waves of anxiety through me as I listened to the cubs' distressed calls from the passenger seat. My small field station, typically used for tracking local wildlife populations, was about to become an impromptu nursery. Once inside, I set up a makeshift den, using old blankets and a heating pad. The cubs huddled together, their tiny bodies shivering despite the warmth. I'd raised orphaned animals before, but never bobcat cubs, and certainly never 3 at once. The largest cub, a male with distinctive dark spots, seemed to be the protector of the group. I decided to call him Shadow. The middle cub, another male with lighter markings, appeared more curious than frightened. Storm felt like the right name for his bold personality. The smallest, a female with the most beautiful facial markings I'd ever seen, became Luna. Feeding them required kitten formula mixed with specialized nutrients. Shadow was the first to accept the bottle, his survival instincts kicking in immediately. Storm followed suit, but Luna remained hesitant. For hours, I patiently coaxed her, knowing that without proper nutrition, she wouldn't survive the night. Finally, as the desert sunset painted my station in golden hues, Luna latched onto the bottle. Relief flooded through me as I watched her tiny throat working to swallow the life-giving formula. All 3 cubs were feeding now, their bellies gradually rounding with nourishment. That first night, I slept on the floor beside their makeshift den, waking every 2 hours to feed them. Each successful feeding felt like a small victory. I was committed now, whether I'd planned it or not. These 3 lives depended entirely on me, and I wouldn't let them down. Week 2 brought unexpected challenges and small miracles. The cubs had grown noticeably stronger, their eyes now fully open and alert to every sound. Shadow had appointed himself the leader, always the first to investigate new sounds or smells. Storm lived up to his name with boundless energy, constantly pouncing on his siblings or my shoelaces. Luna remained the most cautious, but her trust in me was growing daily. Establishing a routine became crucial. Every 4 hours, I prepared their bottles, watching as they grew more coordinated with each feeding. Between meals, I encouraged them to explore their expanding play area, always under careful supervision. Their natural instincts were already emerging, the way they stalked imaginary prey, their perfect balance despite their small size, and their incredible hearing that picked up sounds I couldn't detect. The real breakthrough came when Luna first purred. I was cleaning her face after feeding when the soft rumbling started deep in her chest. The sound was different from a house cat's purr, wilder, more primal, but filled with the same contentment. Soon, all three were purring during feeding time, their trust in me solidifying with each passing day. My colleagues at the university were supportive but concerned. Bobcats weren't meant to be raised by humans, they reminded me. The goal was always rehabilitation and release. But as I watched the cubs play fight in the evening light, their spotted coats gleaming, I wondered how I would ever find the strength to let them go. Dr. Williams, my supervisor, visited during their third week. "They're magnificent, Sarah," he said, watching Storm attempt to climb my leg. "But remember, the kindest thing we can do is prepare them for the wild." I nodded, knowing he was right, but my heart was already too invested to think clearly about the future. By their second month, the cubs had transformed from helpless babies into energetic, mischievous juveniles. Their personalities became more distinct with each passing day. Shadow remained the protective older brother, always positioning himself between his siblings and any perceived threat. Storm was the adventurer, constantly testing boundaries and exploring every corner of their expanding enclosure. Luna had blossomed into a graceful, intelligent female who seemed to understand my emotions better than I understood them myself. I'd expanded their living space to include an outdoor enclosure connected to my station. Watching them experience grass, rocks, and natural sunlight for the first time filled me with indescribable joy. They approached each new element with the perfect combination of caution and curiosity that would serve them well in the wild. Their hunting instincts emerged naturally. I introduced live insects and small prey items, marveling at their innate ability to stalk and pounce. Shadow was methodical in his approach, studying his target before striking with precision. Storm preferred the direct assault, often missing his mark but never losing enthusiasm. Luna combined patience with lightning-fast reflexes, rarely missing her target. Feeding time had evolved from bottle feeding to teaching them to tear meat and crunch bones. Their adult teeth were coming in, sharp and perfectly designed for their carnivorous lifestyle. I found myself both proud and slightly intimidated by their growing strength and natural weapons. The most challenging aspect was maintaining the balance between providing care and avoiding over-domestication. I limited my direct interaction, encouraging them to rely on each other rather than on me. Yet, in quiet moments, when Luna would rest her head against my leg, or Shadow would bring me his kill as an offering, I felt connections forming that transcended species barriers. These weren't just animals I was rehabilitating. They were becoming family. At 4 months old, the cubs had grown into magnificent young bobcats. Shadow now weighed nearly 20 pounds, his muscular frame rippling beneath his spotted coat. Storm had developed into a lean, athletic male with incredible speed and agility. Luna, though smaller, possessed an elegance and intelligence that took my breath away daily. Their enclosure had expanded to encompass nearly an acre of natural desert habitat. I'd installed climbing structures, hiding places, and water features that mimicked their natural environment. Watching them navigate this space with increasing confidence filled me with pride and growing sadness. The time for release was approaching, and everyone knew it. Dr. Williams visited weekly now, assessing their hunting skills, territorial behaviors, and independence levels. "They're ready, Sarah," he said, after observing them successfully hunt and cache prey. "You've done an incredible job, but they need to be wild." I knew he was right. The cubs were displaying natural behaviors, marking territory, establishing hierarchies, and showing wariness toward strangers. They were becoming what they were meant to be, wild predators capable of surviving on their own. But the nights were the hardest. When the desert cooled and the cubs settled down for sleep, Luna would often approach the fence nearest to my quarters. She wouldn't make a sound, just sit quietly, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. In those moments, I felt the weight of our bond and the approaching heartbreak of separation. Shadow had begun making territorial calls, his voice echoing across the desert landscape. Other bobcats in the area responded, and I knew they were ready to join their wild community. Storm showed increasing restlessness, pacing the perimeter and testing every weakness in the fencing. The wild was calling them home, and soon I would have to answer that call by letting them go. The release preparations began in earnest during their 5th month. I worked with the State Wildlife Department to identify the perfect location, a remote area of protected desert land with adequate prey populations and minimal human contact. The site was only 30 miles from where I'd found them, close to their mother's original territory. Training intensified as I gradually reduced their dependence on provided food. They needed to hunt successfully for several consecutive weeks before release. Shadow adapted quickly, his patient hunting style proving highly effective. Storm's enthusiasm sometimes worked against him, but his success rate improved daily. Luna surprised everyone by becoming the most efficient hunter, her combination of patience and precision resulting in the highest success rate. I began the heartbreaking process of reducing my interaction with them. No more evening visits, no more gentle words of encouragement. They needed to see me as a provider of basic needs, not as a companion. The transition was harder on me than on them. They were naturally becoming more independent and wild. Dr. Williams brought a film crew to document the release process. "This will help other rehabilitators," he explained. But I struggled with the cameras capturing what felt like such a personal moment. The cubs were wary of the strangers, displaying appropriate caution that reassured me about their readiness for release. The night before release, I sat outside their enclosure one last time. Luna approached the fence and sat quietly, just as she had so many times before. Shadow and Storm joined her, and for a moment, we shared a silence filled with understanding. They knew change was coming, and somehow they seemed ready for it. I whispered the same words I'd said that first day. "I've got you." But now they meant something different. I had them, and soon I would give them the greatest gift I could, their freedom. Release day arrived with a spectacular desert sunrise, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The transport to the release site took 2 hours, with the cubs traveling in separate carriers to reduce stress. They remained calm during the journey, their maturity evident in their composed behavior. The release site was perfect, a secluded canyon with rock outcroppings, dense vegetation, and a reliable water source. I'd scouted the area multiple times, ensuring it provided everything they needed to establish territories and thrive. The nearest human habitation was over 10 miles away, giving them the isolation necessary for successful reintegration. We positioned the carrier strategically around the canyon, allowing each cat to emerge into a different area and establish individual territories naturally. The plan was to open Shadow's carrier first, followed by Storm, then Luna. This sequence would prevent territorial conflicts and give each cat the best chance for successful establishment. Shadow emerged first, his powerful frame moving with fluid grace as he stepped into freedom. He paused at the carrier entrance, surveying his new domain with keen intelligence. After several minutes of careful observation, he moved toward the rocky outcroppings, his natural instincts guiding him to high ground for better visibility and security. Storm's release was more dramatic. He bounded from his carrier with characteristic enthusiasm, immediately beginning to explore every bush, rock, and shadow. His energy was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite the ache in my chest. Luna's emergence was the most emotional. She stepped out gracefully, then turned back toward me one final time. Our eyes met across the distance, and I felt the weight of our shared journey. She seemed to nod slightly, before disappearing into the desert vegetation with the silent grace that had always defined her. They were free, and they were magnificent. The first week after release was agony. I'd installed remote cameras throughout the canyon to monitor their adjustment, but the waiting between glimpses felt eternal. Each day, I reviewed footage with the intensity of a detective, searching for signs of successful adaptation. Shadow established his territory quickly, claiming the eastern ridge with its commanding views and abundant rock shelters. The cameras captured him marking boundaries, hunting successfully, and displaying all the behaviors of a confident wild bobcat. His transition seemed seamless, as if he'd been born for this moment. Storm's adjustment proved more challenging. His boundless energy, which had been charming in captivity, initially worked against him in the wild. He covered too much ground too quickly, exhausting himself and alerting prey to his presence. But by day 5, the footage showed him learning patience, his hunting success rate improving dramatically. Luna's adaptation was the most remarkable. She seemed to understand the canyon's rhythms instinctively, moving like a ghost through the landscape. The cameras rarely caught her directly, but evidence of her presence appeared everywhere. Successful kills, territorial markings, and the occasional glimpse of her distinctive spotted coat. Dr. Williams reviewed the footage with growing excitement. "This is textbook successful rehabilitation, Sarah. They're thriving." His words should have filled me with pride, but instead, I felt a growing emptiness. My purpose in their lives was complete, and they no longer needed me. On day 7, something unexpected happened. All 3 cats appeared in the same frame for the first time since release. They weren't interacting directly, but they were aware of each other's presence. The family bond remained, even in freedom. That night, I dreamed of spotted coats and golden eyes, wondering if they ever thought of the woman who had raised them from helpless cubs to magnificent wild predators. 3 months post-release, the monitoring routine had become my lifeline. Each week, I checked the remote cameras and documented the cats' continued success. They had not only survived, but were thriving in ways that exceeded all expectations. Shadow had become the dominant male in the area, his territory encompassing nearly 5 square miles. Storm had settled into a smaller but resource-rich territory adjacent to his brothers. Luna had established herself in the canyon's most secluded section, her hunting skills making her one of the most successful predators in the region. But success in the wild brought new challenges. Other wildlife had taken notice of the new residents. A territorial dispute with an older male bobcat resulted in Shadow bearing fresh scars, though he emerged victorious. Storm encountered a mountain lion and wisely retreated, demonstrating the survival instincts that would keep him alive. Luna faced her own trials when a pack of coyotes attempted to steal her kill, but her intelligence and agility allowed her to escape unharmed. The most significant development came when Luna began showing signs of preparing for mating season. At 18 months old, she was approaching sexual maturity, and the cameras captured several potential suitors investigating her territory. The thought of her raising cubs of her own filled me with an unexpected mixture of pride and melancholy. Dr. Williams suggested reducing the monitoring frequency. "They're fully wild now, Sarah. Continued observation might be more for your benefit than theirs." His words stung because they were true. I was holding on to a connection that had served its purpose. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to completely let go. These 3 magnificent creatures represented more than a successful rehabilitation. They were proof that love and dedication could bridge the gap between species and give life a second chance. 6 months after release, my routine monitoring was interrupted by an extraordinary event. I was reviewing the latest camera footage when I noticed unusual activity near the canyon's entrance. A familiar spotted form was moving purposefully through the frame, but something was different. This cat was larger, more confident, and moving with deliberate intention toward my monitoring station. It was Shadow. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. He had somehow tracked my scent to the monitoring equipment and was investigating. The cameras captured him examining each device with careful curiosity, his nose working to identify the familiar smell that had once meant safety and food. For 3 days, he returned to the same spot, always at dawn, always alone. He would sit quietly near the camera for several minutes, as if waiting for something or someone. The behavior was unprecedented in my experience with released wildlife. On the 4th day, I made a decision that went against every protocol I'd ever learned. I drove to the canyon and positioned myself near the monitoring station before dawn. If Shadow was looking for me, I needed to see him one more time. As the sun crested the eastern ridge, he appeared. Larger now, his coat gleaming with health, muscles rippling beneath spotted fur. He was magnificent, every inch the wild predator he was meant to be. When he saw me, he stopped, his golden eyes meeting mine across the distance. We regarded each other in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. He didn't approach, maintaining the proper distance of a wild animal, but his presence felt intentional, purposeful. It was as if he was showing me that he remembered, that our bond hadn't been forgotten even as he'd embraced his wild nature. Then, as silently as he'd appeared, he turned and melted back into the desert landscape. Life returned to a new normal after Shadow's visit. The monitoring continued, though less frequently, and all 3 cats remained healthy and successful in their wild lives. I'd begun working on a research paper documenting their rehabilitation and release, hoping to contribute to future wildlife rescue efforts. But the desert has its own rhythms and dangers that no amount of preparation can fully anticipate. The monsoon season arrived early that year, bringing with it unprecedented rainfall and flooding. The usually dry washes became raging torrents, and the canyon that had seemed so perfect for the cat's release was now a dangerous maze of rushing water and unstable terrain. Emergency calls flooded the wildlife department as animals throughout the region struggled with the sudden environmental changes. I joined the rescue efforts, using my knowledge of the area to help coordinate search and rescue operations for displaced wildlife. It was during one of these rescue missions that I received the call that changed everything. A hiker had spotted an injured bobcat near the canyon's flood zone, trapped on a rocky outcrop surrounded by rushing water. The description matched Storm's distinctive markings. Racing to the scene with a rescue team, my heart pounded with fear and determination. The flooding had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien environment. Where once there had been gentle slopes and accessible trails, now there were only treacherous cliffs and violent water. We spotted him from the canyon rim. Storm, injured and stranded on a small island of rock, in the middle of what had become a temporary river. He was alive, but clearly hurt. His left front leg held at an awkward angle. The water was too dangerous for a traditional rescue approach, and time was running out as the storm intensified. Looking at him trapped and vulnerable, I realized that our story wasn't over. The bond we'd forged hadn't ended with his release. It had simply evolved. The rescue operation required every skill I'd developed in over 2 decades of wildlife work. The rushing water made direct approach impossible, and Storm's injured condition meant he couldn't swim to safety even if the current allowed it. We needed a plan that was both quick and safe for everyone involved. Working with the search and rescue team, we rigged a rope system from the canyon rim to Storm's rocky refuge. The plan was dangerous. Someone would have to rappel down to the island, secure Storm in a rescue carrier, and both would be pulled to safety. The volunteer would be fighting against time, rushing water, and a potentially panicked wild animal. I didn't hesitate to volunteer. I raised him. I told the team leader. He knows me. It's our best chance. Despite protests about safety protocols and liability, they agreed. No one else had the relationship with Storm that might make the difference between success and disaster. The descent was terrifying. The rope swayed in the wind, while water crashed below, sending spray that made every surface slippery and treacherous. But as I approached Storm's island, something remarkable happened. He recognized me. Despite his pain and fear, his ears perked forward, and he made a soft chuffing sound, the same greeting he'd used as a cub. "Hey, Storm," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rushing water. "Remember me? I'm here to help." Getting him into the rescue carrier required all my patience and his trust. His injured leg made movement painful, but he allowed me to guide him into the safety of the carrier without resistance. It was as if he understood that I was there to save him, just as I had that first day in the desert. The ascent felt eternal, but finally, we reached the canyon rim. Storm was safe, and our bond had proven stronger than time and wildness. The veterinary examination revealed a fractured radius and severe dehydration, but nothing that couldn't heal with proper care. Storm would need several weeks of rehabilitation before he could return to the wild, and the irony wasn't lost on me. We were back where we'd started, with me caring for an injured bobcat. But this time was different. Storm was no longer a helpless cub, but a mature, wild animal who had chosen to trust me in his moment of greatest need. Setting up a recovery enclosure at my research station felt like welcoming home an old friend who had grown into something magnificent. His recovery was remarkable. The fracture healed cleanly, and his wild instincts remained sharp despite the temporary captivity. He tolerated my care with patient dignity, never fully domesticated but clearly remembering our bond. During feeding times, he would make the same soft chuffing sounds from his cubhood, a private language between us that transcended species. Dr. Williams was amazed by the entire situation. "In 30 years of wildlife rehabilitation, I've never seen anything like this," he said, watching Storm navigate his recovery enclosure with growing strength. "The fact that he allowed you to rescue him, that he trusted you in that moment of crisis, it suggests something profound about the bonds we can form with wild animals." As Storm's strength returned, so did his restlessness. He began pacing the enclosure perimeter and making territorial calls that echoed across the desert. The wild was calling him home again, and this time, I was ready to answer that call without the heartbreak of our first separation. I had learned that love sometimes means letting go, but it also means being there when needed. Our relationship had evolved into something deeper than caretaker and animal. We had become family in the truest sense, connected by trust and mutual respect. Storm's second release was a quieter affair. No cameras, no documentation team, just the two of us returning to the canyon where he belonged. The floodwaters had receded, leaving the landscape changed but still beautiful. New water sources had been created, and the vegetation was more lush than ever. I chose a release point near his original territory, hoping he would quickly re-establish himself in familiar surroundings. As I opened the carrier, Storm paused at the entrance, just as he had months before. But this time, he turned to look at me directly, his golden eyes holding mine for a long moment. In that gaze, I saw recognition, gratitude, and something that might have been affection. Then he stepped into freedom with the confident stride of a wild predator who knew exactly where he belonged. Over the following weeks, the remote cameras confirmed what I'd hoped. Storm had successfully reintegrated with his wild community. Shadow and Luna had both survived the floods, and the three siblings occasionally appeared in the same frames, their family bond enduring despite their independent lives. Months later, Luna appeared on camera with 2 cubs of her own, their spotted coats miniature versions of their mother's beautiful markings. The circle of life continued, and my 3 orphaned cubs had become part of the canyon's natural rhythm. Standing in my research station, reviewing footage of Luna teaching her cubs to hunt, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we'd shared. I had saved 3 lives, but they had given me something far more valuable. They had shown me that love transcends species, that trust can bridge any gap, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the freedom to be wild. The promise I'd whispered that first day had been kept. I had them, I had protected them, and I had given them the greatest gift possible, the chance to live as nature intended, wild and free.